With President Trump talking about closing the US-Mexico border, what is the current state of the crisis there? What role do violent cartels play in this crisis, and how do they exploit loopholes in America's border security? And how does all of this affect everyday Americans living near the border? This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Jan Jekielek. Today we sit down with Congressman Michael Cloud, who represents the 27th District in southern Texas. We discuss the mass influx of illegal immigrants into the U.S., the gaps in U.S. law that fuel it, cartel involvement, and the resulting humanitarian crisis at the border. Congressman Cloud, great to speak with you.
Yes, likewise.
So let's dive right in and talk about the border. Your district is one of the southernmost districts in Texas. Recently we've been talking about these almost extreme sounding measures like actually close the border, the Mexican border. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, we definitely have a critical situation at the border. We knew that months ago. Those of us who live in South Texas actually have known that for years. But it's only escalated, and who would have thought, that we'd have 100,000 migrants in a month come across the border. Last month, 80,000 the month before that, and we're just not set up for that. We're not staffed for that. We don't have the resources for that. It's a critical situation, very critical situation that needs our attention here in Congress.
Let's talk about your district specifically. It's kind of interesting. It's kind of north-south. It's a very long district relative to its width, and I understand it's a kind of a corridor of sorts. I've heard the term fatal funnel.
Yes.
Can you kind of expand on that?
Yeah, there's a couple highways basically that come from the Mexican border that go and travel through our district on their way to Houston, where drugs, where kids who've been trafficked, unfortunately, the sex slave often are dispersed throughout the nation, and that's kind of the trade corridor. So you talk to the sheriffs in our district, they deal with that on a daily basis. You talk to the ranchers at the border. I spoke with one a few weeks ago who said, I find dead bodies on my land all the time. And so these cartels have been pushing this. They work almost as travel agents in a sense, going throughout the world recruiting people to come to the United States, selling them on the idea that, oh, just come across the border, it'll be a nice quick 30-minute, hour walk. Then you'll be good and set to go. And of course, it's not like that at all. Many of them die in the Texas heats. Many of them are abused by the cartels on their way here. Once they get here, held for ransom. It's just unconscionable that we've let this go on for so long.
Tell me a little bit about, from what you've learned, about the sort of motivation of the cartels. There's some sort of financial arrangement to get people across,
Sure.
But there's other issues as well, right? Why they're doing this?
Well, it's about control, it's about influence, it's about money. To them, people who come across the border are dollar figures. They don't care about individuals. Just a couple weeks ago, Customs and Border Patrol released a video where cartel members dropped a couple young ladies into razor wire at the border so that our Border Patrol would leave their post, go there to care for them. Our Customs and Border Patrol, they always prioritize life. And so whenever there's a situation where people's life is in danger, they always go to that. But the cartels take advantage of that. And so they'll call in fake 911 calls in some areas because the only first responders there are Customs and Border Patrol, and then send drugs up the other way. And this is a case where, again, they dropped a couple young ladies into razor wire, and then, once they left their post, filtered humans and drugs through. This is what our inaction has caused to happen on the border.
And this is actually a very interesting question. It seems like this crisis is growing monthly, and is that and why is it now? Is this there's arguments that this is somehow made up or not really a crisis, and from what you're saying, it's extremely serious. So how do we make sense of all this?
Well, if we went there a few months ago, people who are saying people who actually understand the situation, who go there and who are honest about the situation, know that it's a crisis. And we're completely overwhelmed at the border. I sat down with Border Patrol. We were going through just what's happening. Slide after slide, beheadings, bodies found in rivers wrapped in bubble wrap. These horrendous things cartels are doing. And I asked them, I said, what's the next stage for a win? And they said, the next stage for us, the next win for us would be situational awareness. We're not to the point where we're even trying to mitigate the problem, stop the problem. We're just trying to get aware and understanding and have enough resources to understand what the cartels are doing so we can have situational awareness. And this is before, this was when the caravans were only 10,000 people a month, and then it's only escalated since then. We don't have the immigration judges, we don't have the beds, we don't have the forces on the ground to deal with the situation. And so they're taking advantage of it. They're renting and buying buses and bringing people across Mexico to our border.
So is that part of the cartel pitch even? Like we're overwhelming the border, so if you get through, you're probably gonna get released.
For them, it's a numbers game. We'll say, hey, we caught so much fentanyl, or we caught so much drugs, or we found these many people in a certain situation. And for them, it's, they assume it's the cost of doing business for them. They know we're going to catch some of it. They know we're going to catch some drugs. They know, but whether it's a 3-to-1 or a 10-to-1 ratio, we don't know how much we're not catching, but we know we're probably not getting even half of it.
So you mentioned one example from your district. Do you have some other recent scenarios that you could just tell us about what people have faced?
Yeah, we had a couple people in our office yesterday, and they came here on a completely different issue, some people from our district. But as they were leaving, they just said, with the situation on the border, we had one of our clients, their daughter and son-in-law were taken by cartels and held for ransom, $50,000 for ransom, and beat up before they were returned. Talked to another one, they're like, yeah, we have, a member of our family has some land on the border, and they've been told by the cartels, you might want to stay off your land, we're using it. And so this is happening in the United States of America. The people's property is
and that's even north of the border.
This is north of the border, yeah. This is our side of the border.
Right.
And so.
But what I mean is your district is even, I don't know how many miles.
We're about 3-4 hours from the border.
Right.
You'll come to the border, and a lot of that's happening along the border, but we have family members, interests shared there, and then 2 major highways that go up into our border. Before that, there's checkpoints, like at Falfurrias, for example, that's in the middle of a bunch of ranch land.
But these cartels you're saying they're basically operating as far as four hours north of the border and so forth to do these things?
Yeah. They control the southern side of the border, and then they're working their way into controlling as much as they can to get these horrendous things. Recently there was enough fentanyl caught to kill millions of people in the United States, right?
Right, of course.
And so that's what we caught. That's what we caught. And so we're seeing diseases that have pretty much been eradicated in the United States spring up again here in this situation at the border. So it's a national security crisis, it's a health crisis, it's a humanitarian crisis. It needs to be addressed, and ultimately we got to think through, how do you heal the world? How do you heal the world? We cannot immigrate half the world's population that lives in poverty to solve the world's problems. Wish we could, but the thing we can do is be that shining city on the hill that our founders talked about, and let people know that if you live by the same principles that this nation was founded on, you can have the same prosperity that this nation was founded on. And I just imagine, what if 20,000 people marched on the Capitol in their nation? They can enact the kind of change in their nation that would last for generations. And so our hearts go out to people who are looking for economic prosperity, but that's not what our asylum laws are for. There's people who are really being persecuted throughout the world, and that's what that's for.
Actually, I don't know the updated numbers when it comes to how many asylum cases actually turn out to be legitimate asylum cases. The vast majority aren't. That's what you're
the vast majority. It's over 80 to 90% are not. And again, we don't have the immigration judges to deal with the situation, to process them even. And so, the plan is to overwhelm the system from the cartel's perspective. And we haven't had the political will to get it done.
There's this term being brandished around, sanctuary cities, basically places where folks that get in know they can go and basically be safe from removal or something like that. How does that work in Texas? Is there any sort of reality like that in Texas? Are people heading there? And
in our last section, the State House has banned sanctuary cities in a sense. That doesn't mean that there are people there who still aren't working with it, but
how does that work? How do you ban this?
Well, they outlawed it, but that doesn't mean that sheriffs in certain towns aren't turning a blind eye or not being helpful in those kind of situations. But anyone who raises their hand and says, I'm going to uphold the law of the land and the Constitution should do that. And so we can't expect the people that elect us, the people who are in our citizenry to follow the law, if we can't expect our elected officials to follow the law. And so it's extremely important that people take that oath seriously.
A number of law enforcement officials have been explaining to you some of the harsh realities that they're facing, but you also mentioned other law enforcement officials that seem to be turning a blind eye. And that seems odd to me and probably to our viewers. How does that work?
Well, the vast majority of Texas law enforcement understand the situation. They're dealing with it every single day. And it's not just law enforcement. It's hospitals that are overwhelmed, school districts that are overwhelmed, counties who have to bury the bodies of migrants who are found. So by and large, there's a lot of coordination and a lot of collaboration. But you mentioned sanctuary cities, and there are a few individuals who are trying to exert their political will over what's best for the state of Texas and what's best for our country.
Excellent. Okay, so any final words with respect to what you would hope to see happen at the border most immediately?
We have to recognize this is a situation that Congress should have taken care of a long time ago. We've promised it to the American people. We really need to take action here in Congress. I don't know if we're going to see that political will happen, unfortunately. So this is why the President's declared an emergency declaration. And so we need to see real action at the border to mitigate this crisis and understand that it is seriously a crisis. The news isn't even covering half the situation and the atrocities that are happening at the border. It's really, really sad.
Thank you very much, Congressman Cloud.